Welcome to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do with this channel is share content designed to make sure that you're supported through whatever's next in your life. And we'd love to continue to do that. I've got a favour to ask today, and what I'd ask you to do is just subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a consistent basis. Thank you, and let's go on to the interview. Welcome to What Happens Next, the channel, podcast, YouTube show dedicated to thinking about and examining the nuanced change we go through in our lives, often in our 50s and 60s, when we're thinking about what happens next. And if you're a regular viewer of the show, you'll know that old learn, earn, and then stop is probably not a model many of us actually want to follow anymore. And What Happens Next is dedicated to that element where we're getting to the end of our real long-term careers and we're thinking there's something different, but we definitely don't want to stop. And today I'm really excited to be welcoming Alex Keay on to talk about this challenge, and actually how the challenges we face when we're making that transition are probably a lot more complicated than we first assumed. Alex, welcome to the show.
Great to see you, Chris. And it's Alex Keay, although I answer to most things.
Actually, you know what? I should know that by now, shouldn't I?
You should do.
Know that by now. And full disclosure, as you know, I have an amazing team at Savello and who helped me run What Happens Next. They had to tell me that I had two browsers open before we started. So this is going to go really badly. Tell us a little bit about you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm the person that Essex business owners call when they've built up a brilliant business, but they're not sure about what their exit is going to look like. So I help them think about their succession or what they need to do when they want to plan leaving their business.
And what challenges often come up?
There's a lot of challenges. In fact, I'm going to do a blog on this about the top 10 challenges. But there's something I've thought about in terms of linking to what you do around what happens next, in that really there's something around their legacy, there's something about their identity, and then it's something about what happens next.
Yeah.
But often it can be as simple as they're sort of saying, well, the business is going okay, it's profitable, we're running it, we're out of the startup or growth phase, but there's something not quite right. And there could be many factors affecting that. It could be their own factors around their satisfaction or sense of purpose and mission. It could be a life-changing event that's going on around them, to them or their family. Yeah. And these things happen from time to time. And that's where, every client I speak to has something different, but there are patterns, as I'm sure you would have picked up on.
I think the interesting thing for me is, and I read a book recently written by a guy that we haven't had on as What Happens Next guest, but actually would be a good one. And the book's called, it's actually for financial planners more than, and this is why it probably isn't right for What Happens Next, but it's called Everybody Exits, right? And his conceit at the start of the book is we all exit our business at some point, at some stage. And often it's circumstance, but often it's planned. What do you think about that element? And the argument Brian the Hill makes in this book is a fair one, I think. What do you think about that argument to say you should plan it instead of let it happen to you? And how do we take that first steps towards doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit biased. I think everyone should have a plan, even if they're in startup mode. And the reason I say that is if you don't have a plan, essentially, your exit is going to be determined of one of the 5 Ds. So I talk about 5 Ds, and then being a disagreement. It could be with a shareholder, it could be with the legal side, a customer side. It could be divorce is another common one, another form of disagreement, but one that's life changing and can affect your business. It could be a disaster. You know, we think disasters are very rare, but look at COVID, look at floods, look at, you know, heat waves that cause fires. You know, all of us in recent times can probably think of times when people or businesses have been impacted by those. And the last two, which everyone knows about, disability and death, and I'm not trying to bring us down here, Chris, but it can impact business, not just for the founder, but it could be their member of the family, it could be a critical employee. So essentially, if you don't have a plan, one of those circumstances will determine your exit.
Yeah. I suppose the other interesting thing, and you've hit upon it, is legacy. And I think when I think about, I mean, I've asked my kids about whether they want to take over, and they've said definitely not. When you're exploring the concept of legacy, what sort of subjects come up that might inform somebody's next stage?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, definition of terms. I mean, legacy, you know, isn't necessarily what's written on your tombstone or some big pillar erected for your legacy. It could be, you know, just how you want to be remembered or how you want your business to transfer and sustain beyond you, really. And so for some people, that's appropriate or not. You know, I had a business, a small, you know, just myself as an IT consultant in the late 90s. And when I left that to move to Australia, I wasn't thinking about legacy. I was just thinking about what I was doing next. So even though my accountant tried to get to me to talk about, well, you could do something around this, I just shut it down, forget it. But I think for some business I talked to, you know, I talked to a founder this week, been running a very successful business for 25 years. He is thinking about the legacy, not just in terms of benefits to him, but in particular his employees and his customers and suppliers who he's
100%
been, you know, a part of their fabric for decades. So it depends on the circumstances and stage businesses are in. But to your point, you know, think about it and then have the conversations. Don't just, you know, you said you'd had that with your children, even if it was joking. A lot of family businesses do not have those conversations. And that's why, you know, 61% of businesses do not have any form of succession plan in place. And there's a very high number of family business do not transition successfully.
Yeah, and I like the idea of thinking about legacy in terms of there was a guy that I knew many years ago now who, when I started my business, I was having a conversation with him, and he was actually selling his business, his financial planning business at the time, and he used to talk to me about the Tesco test. Right. And I didn't know what the Tesco test was. So I was like, okay. And he said one of the factors that he used to consider when he was thinking about he sold his business, so who he sold his business to, is if he sold his business and then the following week he was in his local supermarket and one of his clients crossed him in the aisle, would he be comfortable with what the decision he'd made to support his client? And I think about that quite often. You know, how do we make sure that the promises that we, and again, when you, particularly in small businesses, it's often a personal journey, isn't it? You know, you're really personally committed. How do we think about, like, just making the right decision if we do decide to sell to the right seller? Because that's not always the one with the biggest check, right?
No, and we could come on to that, Chris, but I'd say, you know, my approach is we start before then, and that's why I really encourage founders to think about the why and the when about their succession. So almost people often come to me and they'll sort of about, oh yeah, I want to sell the business. And I ask them why, and then they give me some glib. And I said, no, come on, tell me what the real reason is. And they sort of laugh. And then they'll talk about some particular area, because I said, you know, if you really understand the why in terms of your motivations, which could be financial security, it could be health, it could be lots of different reasons. Somebody said to me the other day that, well, they're going to have to make some significant changes to the business, and they're really concerned about that. And I said, so selling the business is the easy way out of those decisions, is it then? And they kind of looked at me a bit sheepishly. And I said, well, that's okay if that's your motivation, but let's own it, because then you can build the plan around that. And actually, some of the selling options become a lot more straightforward because you've decided what the motivation is behind it.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
makes sense. I mean, I think the interesting thing about that as well is when I'm having conversations often with clients who are thinking about the options they've got in terms of their business, some options are going to mean that they're going to have to spend a few years more than they expect and take on challenges that they might not want to. And having those conversations about timescale and capacity, particularly when we're thinking about how you want to spend whatever time you've got left, is an interesting one, isn't it? I think
it's and you would know this far better than I because of your experience in this, but there's two numbers that come up very often when I start to talk about the when.
Yeah.
The first answer is in 5 years' time. And I said, okay, that's fine. It's always 5 years time. It doesn't matter what age, how long the business is going. 5 years.
And it always seems to be 5 years, doesn't it?
Exactly. So the following year, it's still 5 years. So I'll note that. And so I have a bit of fun with that one. And or the other one where sometimes they're a bit more serious about it, they say 1 more year. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I always ask the same thing. I said, okay, so what are you going to do in the next 6 months towards that, or are you not going to do anything? And I the style of coaching I do, I like to challenge them a little bit.
Yeah.
Let them feel a little bit uncomfortable, because the point is, and you'll know this from your financial planning side, is a lot of business owners are reliant on the sale of their business for their financial planning or pension provision. They may not have
enough
substantial pension provision without the sale of the business. So it's almost, okay, well, have you put things in place like your wills, your LPO, which is nothing to do with selling the business, but is about making you feel more financially secure around your future, so that then you can focus on what does the business look like. So there's some foundational stuff. And the biggest problem I see, which is a huge problem, the government estimates in the UK are about 1 million businesses will change hands in the next 5 years. And a lot of those will not be successful transitions because there's nothing in place. Now, if you step back, zoom out of that for you and I, Chris, in terms of the UK PLC, you've got around 300,000 business starting up every year in the UK. You've got about 300,000 coming out. So it's net. There's not much growth in businesses at the moment. But you know what the survival rates of those startups are. It's pretty low. And you've got most of these businesses that I'm talking to that are established, they've got customers, they've got cash flow, they've got profits. What an incredible waste. And what about if we could get some of that new entrepreneurial spirit being channeled into these existing businesses? Reimagine them, fresh energy, fresh ideas, but create a different legacy within that. So that's part of the bigger picture, which I think is something we need to address as a business community, really, I think.
In your experience, Alex, and I'm always curious about this, why do you think, what's the reason you think people defer thinking about succession? And how do you frame that? I mean, I suppose when they're having a conversation with you, they are thinking about succession, right? But what's the reason that people turn around and go, look, not for me at the minute. I've still got plenty of time. I've still got 5 years. How do we frame it in a way where people start thinking about it a little bit earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question. It goes to the core of what I do, really. I talk about what I call the founder's dilemma, and this is most of the founders I I speak to, or business owners, they're successful business people. They wouldn't have survived and got business if they're smart, intelligent, driven people. And typically, somebody's had this conversation with them. Oh, have you got a succession plan or a business exit plan? It's either an accountant, a solicitor, their other half may have said it, or sometimes their own common sense has said that to them.
Yeah.
But then they haven't done anything about it. And I've spoken to lots of people recently about this and just said why. And I think there's a number of factors around it. It's this fear of the unknown. It's likely to be the biggest transaction they would ever do, bigger than their house, which is typically the biggest transaction. There may be some guilt around that, which around is guilt to loyalty to their staff, or sometimes it can be just sheer exhaustion from the daily running grind of the business, that they don't have that time to take that step back and look more strategically around, okay, well, if I want this future, what does that look like? So what they do is they end up freezing, because it's just, they say to me, it's too hard, it's too complex, it's too soon. What else do they say? Or it'll never happen to me. And I typically ask them, I say, do they know anyone their age, whatever their age is, who've been affected by one of those 5 Ds? And they said, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
and how was that for their business? And they said, yeah, it was not a great impact. So I think one of the statistics are, if a founder is incapacitated or out of business unexpectedly, it's typically about a 60% sale drop in the next 2 years after those.
Yeah,
so,
because actually if they've not thought about succession, they're still a key person, right? So and if they're a key person, they're going to have they're going to have an impact. It's interesting you talk about that. The other word that sprung to mind while you were talking is grief. And what I've found is business owners who sell wouldn't normally describe it as grief, but there is a period of loss there, right? Loss of identity, loss of what am I getting up in the morning for now? What part do you think grief plays? And when I think about this, I always think about, I think it's Kubler-Ross, the psychologist, who did a sort of grief circle of grief. And we don't think about grief when we think about transitioning, but is it relevant, and how is it relevant?
Well, my wife, Julie, who is a grief counsellor, so I better tread very carefully here.
We're not treading on any toes, Alex, are we?
I'm not an accredited counsellor, far from it. But I think what I would say, that there is something, but I would term it's more around their identity.
Yeah.
But one of the key challenges that I see is, and it's perfectly natural, that if you spent 10 years or more in a particular role driving a business forward, it becomes part of your core identity.
Yeah.
When somebody asks you what you do, it's just, well, it's this business. It's with you, with Savello, it's not just a job. Yeah. It's part of your identity. I dare say it determines how you run your life, your social circle, all of those things. So when I said to you before about the link to what happens next, is I tend to try and get a client to think about the legacy and the why and the when first. Then it is all about their identity. And one of the first things I do is do a sort of identity audit. So blank sheet of paper, very simple. Write down all of the roles you have within the business, from the formal title, managing director, to chief problem solver or chief arbitrator or mediator within the staff, to strategy, to all sorts of things there. And then what are the other roles? The family roles. You could have roles in the community. You could have roles with hobbies on those side. And then it's thinking about, typically with founders who've been in their businesses a long time, as you get older in the business, life changes, family changes, some of those roles change, and some of those you sort of think, why do I still need to do this role? Yeah. But it's something that I've always done.
Yeah.
And often when I've done a lot of work with leaders and leadership development side, not just with founders, with larger organizations. And one of the key questions I always ask them is, I said, well, how many of the people in your team or business are ready to take over some of your leadership role? And they go, none of them. I said, well, for all of your roles, none of them are capable of taking over any part of your role? And they go, well, I don't think that. I said, okay, well, how much time have you spent coaching and developing, mentoring them to prepare them for that? And often that's about trying to encourage them to get off the field of play and coach from the sidelines. Rather than be the star striker, goalkeeper, every position on the field.
There's a great book on these subjects, and on what happens next. I like to combine a bit of philosophy into the mix. But there's a great book on this subject called "Ego is the Enemy" by Ryan Holiday.
Ryan Holiday, yep.
And I think when I think about that, I'm the only bloke who can do it, or I'm the only woman who can do it. That book always comes to mind, because actually it's that gets in the way, isn't it? It's that element of I've had conversations with my team where part of the conversation is, if you're the only person who can do it, we need to teach somebody else how to do it as well, so that they can make sure they do it. One thing I'm really curious about, because I know you've gone through your own what happens next experience over the past time. What did you learn? What did you learn about that trend? Explain a little bit about the transition you made, and help me understand a little bit about what you went through, what you learned, and what was the most unusual thing? What was the thing you thought, okay, I've got this all sussed, and then suddenly something comes along where you go, actually, I don't know whether I'm ready.
I've had quite a few of those over the years, but one that sprung to mind when you asked me that question was, my dad was in the Navy, so I grew up living around the world. We lived in Singapore, Australia, and other areas. And I think I got to that age, I had a fairly young daughter, 7 years at the time. I thought, I want to do that myself. So I decided we were going to immigrate to Australia and be there in the Olympics, which looked totally illogical in any way from a career move point of view. I had a successful business, very established in IT, working for different banks. But that time, and we stayed there for 5 years and then came back, family reasons. But it was an amazing experience. And I think I learned a few lessons there. I mean, the first one was my intuition was driving that decision. And it was partly for me, but it was also partly for the family side, in terms of let's go on this once in a lifetime adventure type of thing. And I think there's almost that trusting your intuition is telling you something. So when I talk to founders, I can almost sense from them if they've got something is telling them, that little voice inside, what they're doing. Either it's not the same thing. They don't want to have this Groundhog Day, but there's something else pulling them somewhere else. So it's trust that intuition. So I try and help founders reconnect to their inner compass, because everyone has that. But part of the problem with busy founders is they're so busy, they don't have time or space in their minds or their lives to listen to that compass. That's kind of one of the things. And I certainly was guilty of that for a long time. The second one is about getting woo-woo, and you know me, Chris, I'm not particularly soft and fluffy on that side, but there's something about the universe supporting you when you take action. So, once I'd made that decision, I mean, a little aside, I think we had an 18-month time plan from when I put the application in, because they said that's how long it takes typically to get approval. I got approval in 6 months, which is great. But then they said you have to be there by the end of the year. So we had to bring everything forward. So it's like, be careful what you wish for, because it might happen a bit quicker. So, and the link from a succession planning point of view is taking that first step is so important, because then you're moving on that journey really, because you've decided. And the last one is around, progress is more important than perfection. And I think lots of people, myself included, can suffer from this perfectionism. And, that time in Australia, I had some setbacks and other things, but actually it was about learning and adapting, failing fast and trying something else. And, that's when I said to you earlier about founders being frozen about succession by it's too hard, too complex. Take the first step and you're moving towards something, and at least you've got some things in place already. You might not need all of them, but at least you're starting to build towards that.
I love that, and I'm interestingly, all of those three concepts fit in really well to a concept that I'm writing about in the minute for the What Happens Next book, which is that. So what I've done is I've been inspired by design thinking. That business concept, which is all about experimentation, but at a low cost element, and actually making a decision, making incremental progress, and then just guiding your path based on that incremental progress you're making is all low cost experimentation, right? It's all doing that. And I love, because I'm not particularly woo-woo, and we've had guests on What Happens Next who are, I describe myself often as about as spiritually deep as a puddle, because I'm a very evidence-based, science-based guy. And it's interesting, because I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day who said he sees it in a different way, because I am an advocate for kindness and love. Actually, that you might describe me as deeper than I think, but I don't know about that. But I love that concept of the reticular articulation system in the brain, which says, as soon as you take a bit of action and you move incrementally towards a direction, you just see more opportunity in that area. And that element is really interesting. I absolutely love that. So we've talked about the 5 Ds. What can we do if we're not ready to move on yet to think about mitigating for those 5 Ds?
So you mean you're not ready to sell the business?
So I've seen you. I've got a succession plan. I'm 3 to 5 years away, but I'm conscious that these Ds might happen sooner rather than later.
Well, some of the things are really quite boring and dull and very simple transactional things, but get your wheels in place, get your costing powers of attorney in place.
Yeah.
You haven't seen a financial planner, go and see one. I can recommend a good one.
Give me his name.
But the other side, and this coming back to what you said about identity, is almost think through those roles that you play today and say, okay, if you were, run over by the bus, who could do those roles? And if you haven't trained them up or got somebody to do that, and some of that could be somebody within your organization, or it could be somebody outside, you could outsource some of that elements, but it's being intentional about that. And I'd say almost looking through that type of project almost through a strategic lens. So what I mean by that is saying, you're not talking about this from running the day-to-day operations. You've probably already got that nailed. This is about, how do you not, I'm out the door tomorrow, but I'm starting to step away step by step around this. And that's about delegation. That's about, the work that I do is very much about disentangling that core identity. You actually exist as a human being beyond your business.
You are not your job, right? You are not your job.
Yeah. But particularly founders, because a lot of people who don't run their own business have very strong identities tied to their job or their role. But with founders, it's even more entrenched. So that's the first step, linked to the legacy and identity. And then I typically, I have a model that I use, but is really self-actualization, but it is just really going a little bit deeper behind what is really going to motivate you and sustain that motivation for you to make these changes. Because if you don't have motivation in place, it's not going to go anywhere.
And I definitely want to explore that concept of self-actualization. But one thing that I was really interested in is how deep you go when you're thinking about, you said earlier about the role somebody plays in their life. So you might be chief problem solver, you might be dad cab, you might be a really poor paddle tennis player. I had to get in there somewhere, Alex. A really poor paddle tennis player.
Are you impressed that I played my first game there?
How'd it go?
It was wonderful. We had such a
game, isn't it?
It was an intergenerational game. It was Julie's son and Rob and his girlfriend Sophie, and Julie and I playing. So
who won?
Well, I think it was an even match is probably the best. But I kept missing, because I'm used to playing tennis, and it's like it's a different size bat, but it was a lot of fun.
It is
even though it rained, we were still playing, even though it was raining.
And I will drag you for a game at one point. But the interesting thing about that is I love the idea of identifying those. Like in my friendship group, I'm the one who organises all the paddle games, and they always laugh in the business because I don't even organise my own diary in the business, but for the paddle group, I'm the one who books the courts and pays for it and then gets the money back and stuff like that. But that forms a different role in my life. Does that make sense? It feels a different. We all know that social connection is really important, and actually being the one who's the driver of that is really important. How deep would you go when you're going through that? Identify. Would you go as granular as I'm the one who arranges the paddle? How deep would you go in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's core to the work that I do around identity, and what I try and help my clients understand is you can try different identities on for size. So it doesn't have to be fixed forever.
Yeah.
And when they kind of look at, and I sort of joke with them. I said, "Do you remember when you were at school?" And they go, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, you're not at school any longer, are you?" So, but I get them to describe what it was like for them at school. I said, "So you did change your role from when you left school?" Because some of them have been in their work role and founder role for a long time. So, and there's this academic, Hermione Ibarra, who has worked. His work I really admire around working identity. But this idea is, we often talk about you've got to have some grand theory and then you learn how to perform this. And actually the theory around leadership is much more around, actually it's actions and behaviors drive, the identity will follow behind that. So I used to do triathlons quite a bit. I wasn't particularly any good, but I think I definitely over time, doing all the training, doing all the nutrition stuff, doing all the things that mad triathletes do, I became a triathlete in my head, a core part of my identity. I've been vegan for 7 years, so that's a core part of my identity. But these things can change. I literally became a vegan. I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to try this. So I became on that journey. So the reason I share those is if somebody says, well, I'm running the business, but what I really want to do is become an expert paddle player. They're called paddle players. I don't even know the terminology.
I'm assuming so. I'm not one.
Yeah. But, well, what would that entail then? Well, you probably need to devote time. You probably need to get the kit, the racket, the stuff like that. But, and then could you over time start becoming that? Because then, your whole identity is no longer 100% founder. There's like 5-10% paddle player, So and once you get a founder playing with some of this, some of them are, contribution to mentoring or developing other people. I mean, what I've found working with some leaders is once you show them how fulfilling coaching or mentoring or developing leaders, they get hooked on it, and they throw all their enthusiasm and talent and expertise in it, and they're fantastic.
Well, I suppose the other big thing, like I talk I think about quite a lot is, what do you love to do, and how can that be applied in other elements of your life?
Yeah.
Because often the skills and talents that you bring to being a founder can actually be used in being a charity trustee or organising your panel group, or like all of these elements are interchangeable, and I think allow you to get a bit closer to the life you want to live. I think it's really interesting. I know you mentioned, Alex, about self-actualization coaching. The bit I'm curious about is how that differs from other sorts of coaching and why it might be right for one person and not right for somebody else.
Yeah, and I only mention it, I mean, just because I think it's a really useful model. I mean, I've used lots of models over the years I've been coaching, but this particular one, and it's the person who authored it is Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, and he hosts the Psychology podcast. So if anyone wants to find more out about it, just type in the Psychology podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. But for your listeners, if you think about a sailboat has two components. It has a sail and it has the boat or the hull side. So the boat represents your security needs, okay? And there's three elements to that. And it is safety, which could be personal, financial safety, security. The second part is connection. So it's connection to your family, friends, team, community. And the third part is self-esteem, your fundamental self-worth or identity, which we've been talking about. So the idea is that if your boat is full of holes, it isn't going to sail very far. So you need to address these security needs. And typically when I'm talking to a founder, I'm saying, okay, well, look at those through the lens of your business. And let's think of what is it that you need as the business founder or owner around these needs. And then on the second half, the sail, you think of the sail is what actually moves you. If you're going to go on a journey, that's what gets you moving. And often I find the business founders I work with, they have no problems. They have a million ideas of how they can grow in the next thing. But there's three elements to that again. So the first part is exploration. So the curiosity, what you want to learn, new challenges. Love, so authentic meaning and relationships.
Yeah.
And purpose, so typically contributing something bigger than yourself. So where my coaching differs from traditional exit advice is that traditional advice is really focused on the destination, the valuation, the sale price, get a certain number and away, everything's happening. Whereas what I do, my focus is really, they're doing that, but have they checked whether the boat's seaworthy to get to that journey? Whereas I start, can we patch those holes up first for you so that your boat is very secure? Then we can move on to your growth factor where you're confident you've already addressed those.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Do you think that some business owners fill those holes with stuff in their business? And is there a danger in getting rid of the business and suddenly there's holes that weren't there before?
Absolutely. I mean, there's typically, often if this work isn't done, not just by me, but other people as well, there's often severe buyer's remorse, but also can be depression and mental health issues 12 months after the sale is very typical.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now, one of the things that I'm always curious about as a family business ourselves is what happens when you start including wives and brothers and not daughters, but other family members into the mix. How do family dynamics impact how you might plan for succession?
Not at all, of course.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad to worry about.
I write about this in my blogs, and I use things like Downton Abbey and This City Is Ours as common dramas around this piece. There's a reason why they are so popular as TV dramas. I don't know if you've seen the recent Guinness one, which is another one. So there's a number of factors at play here. So if we just dissect them a little bit. So when you have family members involved in either the running of the business or the ownership, the shareholding of the business, you're not just dealing with the balance sheet.
Yeah.
You're dealing with, I don't know, it could be 30 years worth of Sunday dinners around there. And the biggest challenge is you've got tangled roles. So is this person in this conversation your director of operations? Or is it your son? Or are you, as the mother, are you able to veto anything that person who is in the family comes to you with, so that they feel, not there? Sometimes it can feel that every decision in the family business is like a personal referendum on your relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So the legacy trap I talk about is particularly for founders who've built the business up, is they almost have in their head that their life's work is only validated if the next generation takes it over and goes, oh, fantastic, I'm going to go.
Yeah.
Which for some
works.
is perfect, but not for all. And the other side to that, I was talking to a lady I met at an event yesterday, and we were talking about, my mother's Chinese and she had an Asian parent as well, and we were talking about family expectations, which start very young and continue. So there's almost this awkward dynamic that in some cases it could be the father or mother figure who built the business is looking to hand it over, and maybe the second generation is thinking, well, I'm not sure I really want that, but I feel that guilt and feel that responsibility for continuing that legacy. So the problem with this is often people don't speak about these things. So they're like the elephant in the room that goes on until, as I said, one of these 5 Ds forces someone to have to make a decision. So I act, and I think the Nedbank did some research on this, is only 30% of family business transition to the next generation. So and only a mere 10% make it to the third. So the odds are stacked against you, and that's because these emotional scorecards are not being addressed. So what I do is I act almost to facilitate some of these conversations as a neutral translator, not for every family issue, but the ones directly related to, is there a path forward to evaluation or a business exit? Can we just get those things on the table and have some sensible discussions with them?
But also explore the options, right? Because actually, if the next generation aren't going to want to continue the business, then there's a conversation about living vicariously through your kids and what happiness looks like.
Sometimes it can be a real relief, because almost you have these, so the second generation, they don't want to do it, and the founder says, well, I don't think you were capable of doing it anyway, so at least.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. But I think it was interesting. So I was at Paddle on Sunday, and I had this conversation with a guy who was a second generation electrician. So it was his dad's business, and then he took over, and he's built the business really well and really enjoyed it. And what I was curious about is that transition from dad to son. And he said to me, so I said to him, what was it like? How did that happen? And he said, Chris, I didn't feel I had a choice. And it's so interesting that, because I've got a client I'm thinking of right now where that happened many years ago. And yes, the business is one element, but also I also think about the happiness of those people and whether that transition. You're right in terms of communicating then allows you to make decisions, doesn't it? So that is
avoiding it and leaving it as the elephant room doesn't help.
But then you want to, instead of somebody feeling resentful about it, having the open and honest communication to both work out what or a family working out what the right route is probably the way to go. It's so interesting.
There's a couple of things, if I can just add to that, is that I met somebody at North Essex Expo a few weeks ago. It was really inspiring. I'm guessing age in his mid-30s, but he's second generation. Three brothers are in the business. I won't mention the name of the business because it wasn't my client, but it was an amazing story. And I asked him, I said, how did you manage this transition? Did you have any hair? He said, no. I said, well, how did you persuade your dad that you were ready to take over? He said, oh, well, we had a conversation, the three of us, and we said, the only way he's going to accept this if we demonstrate we're better than him. And so they figured out they each had to take a different role and show the three of them were more powerful than him. And they didn't push him out. He's still there, but they said they had to prove that they could do it and introduce new things. I thought it was so inspiring just listening.
That's interesting, isn't it? But actually, when I think about that, I think, well, actually, the other way to potentially do that, and again, you don't know whether dad's coached them into that way temporarily. Like, you don't know the dynamic, do you? Because without having a conversation with dad. But the other interesting thing is potentially dad could turn around and go, show me, and exactly. I'll coach you and help you and support you. And that might be a good way to help you do it. I think when we think about what happens next, Alex, we always talk about the fact that the what happens next journey is different for people who have mostly been employed versus people who have run businesses for a long time. What differences in your experience is there, and what factors, if somebody listening to this has run a business and is thinking about succession, they should consider in addition to the standard stuff that you might want to think about when you're thinking about what happens next?
So are we talking about the difference for a founder specifically?
Founder.
Yeah. I think it's the piece I said around the identity typically is deeper. So, and the impact of that for a lot of people is it's harder to sort of almost understand that. And, I would recommend working with a coach or somebody, a mentor or business coach, somebody you trust, to work through that, because it's quite hard to do that on your own.
Yeah.
I did a coaching accreditation 7 years ago, and it was interesting because I realized now, looking back, is the work they were doing us with that was very much about, okay, well, you do this other job, commercial sales side, but you want to be a coach, do you? And it was kind of really pushing us to say, well, who am I as a coach? And why do they keep repeating it? I answered that last time, but then as the 6 month accreditation went around, I got, oh, okay, yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. And so there's this work around, you don't suddenly wake up one day and become what, I imagine it, and so therefore I am.
Yeah.
Some work that needs to go into saying, okay, and particularly if your identity has been, shall we say, the same for a long fixed period.
Looking back, what was that transition then? So you said, like, yeah, I want to be a coach, but then what realization did you come to over time that was different from the one initially?
It's funny, that's my CEO at the time says, yeah, only you, Alex, would immediately go, you've got to go and sign up for this accreditation on that. So I wanted to know. I'd been involved in leadership development and mentoring for a long time, been in the L&D side, learning and development, for a long time. And I'd been a trainer, so I'd done some of training and facilitation. But I was a bit intrigued by the psychology behind it and some of what I'd observed in some of my team, some of the people that I'd mentored, and I'd been coached myself. Yeah. And I was quite often, I smile because some of my clients are quite skeptical. I don't think that any of them being as skeptical as I was when I first started. But I found the questions that she asked me sort of stayed with me. And I was I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know how I feel. And it was really tickle. And I think I did benefit from it in terms of, helping me understand a different way of operating as a leader, and probably making me much more aware of the impact I was potentially having on other people
Yeah.
Subconsciously, or just tone it was using and things. And yeah, that was something.
Yeah. And that was a transition, was it? That wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, it took quite a long time, and I had a coaching practice alongside my main commercial corporate job for quite a while as well.
Yeah.
What I've found is working with smaller business founders, I think, is the most rewarding work I've ever done, really. And just in terms of helping them, find different paths to navigate. I talk about navigating their business exit with clarity, because I think if you can give them clarity about the when and the why, these people are smart enough to figure out the how and the execute. That's something.
Yeah.
It's that.
I mean, it's so interesting. So, two elements of that. I think, like in our work with our clients, that strategy piece often feels big, doesn't it? It feels like I need some help. Tactic, like smart people are good at tactics. Smart people know what ISAs to pick and then they might need a bit of support in terms of the financial planning side. But that, like, just where do I stand and where am I going is a really big one. Then the other thing I was going to mention was that I've been having some coaching recently, and it's been the first time I've done it. So never really had a sort of coach or a coaching experience, and because I want to learn about the impacts, particularly as I start to help people when we launch whatever we're going to launch with What Happens Next year. The interesting thing for me is two things, and you've talked about them both. Number one is space. So for me, and this is only my personal experience, but I'd be interested to hear about how your clients have gone through this. Number one is just having the space to turn around and go, well, that's interesting, I'm thinking that. And in a normal day, I probably haven't got the space to do that. So that coaching environment is a really good place that I can have that space to think. The reason I chose to work with a coach I do was interested as well, and I think there's probably a bit that to learn from this, because we were having this conversation. She's helping me with some elements that I'm building as part of the What Happens Next project. An amazing lady called Ruth Hughes. She's got a master's in positive psychology. I've known her for years. Her trial still works. She's brilliant. But what was interesting is she said to me, have you ever had any coaching? And I crossed my arms and said, no. She went, you don't think you need it, do you? And I was like, I don't know whether I think I do. But I'm 5 weeks in, actually more than 5 weeks, and what's been great for me is she's asking, that's two elements. This is what I'm getting from it. Number one, she's asking questions. She's challenging me in a way that other people in my life wouldn't. And I need that sometimes. And I feel more accountable because and I know there's no, implication to not doing what we've promised each other, but actually having that external accountability is interesting. So I'm experiencing the benefit of that coaching journey, and I'd imagine, and I'd be curious about your answer, I'd imagine that a lot of, as you say, smart, successful business owners often at the start don't get the benefits, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, I was as skeptical myself before I'd had it. Interestingly, I've had some quite humbling coaching experience for the last 18 months, going back to golf after a 10-year break. And I went in with these I sort of told my coach, I want to learn this, this, and this. And I've got these technical things. And it was quite humbling where he just got me no tech or anything, just looking at my swing and doing very basics. And basically he told me I have to unlearn all the things that I've been doing and start again with the basics. And it's been really refreshing, actually, saying, and it's, I recommend people get coaching. It's just a way of accelerating your learning. And also, going back to what I said about identity, it can be really helpful for that as well. Because sometimes when you think, okay, I want to try this new identity, go back to the paddle play. Okay, well, what are some of the things you have to have in place as foundations to do that? Well, a coach is going to help you get there a lot quicker because they've done hundreds of thousands of hours on it, and you haven't. Or you could just get a few YouTube videos, which is what a few people do. But I don't think that's the same as a very experienced coach, and also get a specialist coach. So I think I'm not a fan of generalist coach.
What makes a good coach, and how do you decide whether you need a mentor or a coach?
Good question. I mean, I think it depends what problem are you trying to solve, or what are the domain interests that you have. So that's why I've made it very specific. But what I'm interested in helping is really Essex SME business founders who are looking at succession and business exits. Come to me if you have that. If you want to do grief counselling, go talk to my wife.
That's it.
But I think the mentoring thing is interesting because mentoring would often involve some transfer of knowledge or previous experience. So it could be useful. My golf coach is mentoring me as well, because he is telling me, actually, you do this instead of that, you'll get this different answer. He isn't expecting me to come up with the answer. What I tend to do with most of my business founders is I'm coaching them because they often have the answers. It's a question of getting those into a practical, executable steps that are not overwhelming, and maybe some of the sequencing of it, so they don't have to do everything at once. And also get started. And coming back to your accountability stuff, it's not like homework, but I think there is something in the coaching relationship, because one of the questions I always ask, and I said, what did you learn and what was most useful to you from the session? But then I also ask, what are you going to commit to for yourself, not for me? Because it's almost building that trust and accountability both ways. So I'm, as a coach, I'm going to show up and give you 100% what I can do to help you. But equally, you need to make the commitments to yourself, not to me.
100%.
Otherwise, I've spent a lot of time in learning and development, and say people don't want learning and development. They want behavioral change. But the behavioral change only comes if you commit to taking the action for that behavioral change. So a lot of people, as I said, people do not lack knowledge of what you need to do to put a succession plan or an exit plan in place. It's well known. You could Google it, you could AI it tomorrow. The challenge is, how do you do that and apply it in a way that you can see the difference?
And I think about, and this is an interesting identity thing, isn't it? Because I know that the action I take off the back of my coaching is for me.
Absolutely.
I don't want to be the bloke who says one thing and does another. And that goes back to that element
of your core identity, isn't it? But what I'm saying is, at a macro level, it's your trust relationship with your coach.
100%.
You don't want to, because
you want to break it.
100%.
I love that. What story from the work you've done best describes the work you do?
I was thinking about one particular founder I did some work with, and profitable business, pillar of the community, very well respected, probably financially set up for life. I didn't go into his personal side, but I had that impression. And he was saying to me he was suffering from the Sunday evening itis, dreading the Monday morning side, which was intense. When he explained, he just said, he'd lost some of his passion for the business. That was affecting his self-esteem because, he didn't really feel he had a role. His connection with family was strained, partly because of all the hours he was working with the business, but partly he felt lost. And he felt a bit lost. He was unsure or didn't feel safe about what his identity was anymore around that piece. So the work we did was very simple. It wasn't about selling or business valuation on that. It was building his identity step by step. I did this exercise where, very simple about what your values are, and it's not anything particularly deep, but it's saying, what's important to you. And people will say these things, family and something. I say, okay, can you open up your calendar for this month? And then we go through it together and we say, okay, based on the values he said, how much time is he allocated to that? And then, it's an interesting conversation there. And then you see, okay, well, if you're committing to these values, what's going to shift then? And what are you going to say no to? Because part of my challenge is that a very simple definition of strategy. Strategy is we do this, we don't do that.
Yeah.
And if that's clear in the founder and they've transmitted that clarity to every member of their organization, delegation and actually role clarity becomes far simpler. So even doing that as a simple exercise can make a big difference because it starts getting questioning, well, is that my role? Or is there somebody actually involved who could actually do that better than me? Or cheaper than me, or quicker than me, or higher quality than me?
And I like the idea, and I know there's a really great book on this called Who Not How that I read while I was away with the girls, the girls in a camper van, which I won't be doing again. I loved the UK coast, but 3.5, 4 weeks in a camper van is probably a bit too much. But the element that I really loved about that book is that thinking about what your unique skills are and how you best lean into those unique skills. I love the fact that often the diary tells a story that what you tell yourself is different, and asking yourself that question is a fascinating one, is it? I absolutely.
And there's another concept, if people haven't familiar with Ikigai, IKIGAI. People look on that, just Google that. There's plenty of examples of questions you can just ask yourself around that to go a bit deeper. But if you value something, I think what I ask my clients to do is really think about when we're thinking about their identity and why they're thinking of moving on from their business. We spend quite a bit of time defining that, and then we say, where are you spending your time and your energy? So there's one thing to, if I give you an example, if I'm spending time with my family, but I'm on my phone still doing work, that's not the energy commitment.
Time with your family,
So it's not just about blocking your calendar, because I had somebody who was a client said, oh yeah, I've done this. And then I asked some questions a bit more around, they were just going through the motions so they could tick the scorecard off the time, but they weren't
engaged.
Their life energy.
What did you do? Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I think that, thinking about it in terms of the activities you do, and actually where are you, even though you've said you're going to donate the time, is a fascinating one. There's some amazing tips you've shared, so I really appreciate that. Where can people find out a little bit more about you, Alex?
So very simple. Type in Succession Plan Coach, all one word.com, and you'll find me, or LinkedIn, Alex Keay, Keay. On there. And on my website, give for your listeners, there's a free 5-minute quiz which will test them on their succession readiness scorecard, and you get an instant score. You don't need to give any information or anything. It's confidential, so I don't store any of it. and it gives you a personalized report on how ready you are. It gives you an idea. So take it and find out how ready you actually are.
Amazing, I love that. And actually, I've got one more question before we finish, because I've just thought one. I talk a lot, and we've talked about incremental change. We've talked about experimentation. We've talked about curiosity, which is what I love. I often think that one of the mistakes that people make when they're planning for what happens next or succession is that all or nothing thinking. Like, one day I'm going to sell my business and stop, and then I'm going to retire. I love the idea of that diary slowly evolving over time so that it's incremental. How do you do that when you run a business? What's the first natural step you might take? You looked at your diary, you've gone, clearly there's a bit of misalignment here. What's the first, like, tiny little incremental step you can take to make a change?
I done a lot of work on this with people I've coached over the years. So I'd say carve out 2 slots in a week. If it's an hour and a half, could be a lunchtime, could be something, and physically go to a separate location. Could be a room, could be outside, no devices, and literally that is your thinking time to give you the chance. Because remember I said about one of the biggest challenges founders have, particularly smaller businesses, is they have this daily grind of all the operational decisions. If they haven't done it, if they haven't got somebody doing that for them, so they don't get space to think more strategically. Now, that can be done. I appreciate everyone has busy schedules, but it can be carved out a commuting time. It can be carved out lunchtime, but it's almost, they don't allow that to be interfered with by, incoming calls or anything like that. And they just use it to create that space, saying, okay, well, what does, I'd say the question before, why would I be thinking about selling the business or exiting? What's really going on for me there? Answer those questions. And when am I talking about 3 years, 5 years, 2 years, or if I could find a way and I could do it sooner, would I? Answer those questions, because then you start building, well, could I really do this? Somebody I was working with recently was saying, he had a successful business and he was setting up a separate franchise in a different location. And what it came down to was his motivation for training up leaders that he'd been neglecting was he realized that if he could get them running, that would allow him to focus on
project that he was really excited about.
Which is really, so he almost was like, he was frustrated that the people he had weren't running the business as he wanted to, even though he hadn't coached or mentored them. But as soon as he saw, actually, this is my escape out, he suddenly
Well, it goes back to that Simon Sinek thing. And then everything leads from there.
And he told me, it was really sort of, because he said, I moved my location, so I sat in the middle by them. I was interrupted every day, so he just made, because his shift went from this coaching and mentoring them is a pain, and I don't think they get there, to, well, I better find out quickly if they can get there, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to do what I really want to do.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that carving out time in your day, and interestingly, I did it really well last year, and I've started to practice again quite recently. That carving out time in my day to think, I do in the morning, and I do that by journaling. And journaling is a really powerful, and it's really weird because when I'm journaling, I'm the only one who reads it, but I won't write down anything that I don't believe to be true. And often that means a stream of consciousness coming out, and then me turning around and going, I don't actually really think. And that element, but walk in the park will do, but changing your environment is absolutely.
But particularly these things about these deeper questions, who am I, what's my identity, things like that. They require some space and some almost detachment from the the daily grind
Yeah.
to give you that chance to think more creatively or differently.
Yeah,
Because if you're constantly just in that reactive mode to getting the job done in front of you, that's the change. And just one thing I'd say on that, Chris, maybe a little bit controversial. Sometimes there is a little bit of a woe is me narrative around the fact, oh, I'm so busy, I can't do this, around that, which is great. I can understand for some founders that may be true. But what greater responsibility do you have to your team and your family than putting something in place that can continue without you, really? So I think that is absolutely, you know, for me, a good leader is putting something in place that can continue beyond.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. Alex, thank you for today. I really appreciate your time, and we've overrun because it was such a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Look forward to catching up again soon. Take care.